What's going on? It's time for another episode of Too Hard for the Radio, transmitting from the future free state of Greater Idaho. I am the one-armed madman. And with me today from lands far away, we've got Hermes Auslander. Hermes, how you doing, man? Thanks for coming on.
Oh, man, I'm well, and thanks for having me. Excited to be on. I was listening to the show as we messaged back and forth a little while ago about, and yeah, I was loving it. So yeah, thanks for having me on, man.
Right on, no problem. So why don't you, let's just get at it right away. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into it.
Where do I start?
Wherever you'd like.
A little bit about myself. Yeah, man, I'm just another one of the weirdos, the old souls. I'm just figuring it out as we go along. I got a podcast myself, the Scuttlebutt podcast, where the buddies and I just hang out, knock a couple cold ones back. Sometimes we have guests on that hopefully know a little bit about a topic we're going to cover. But for the most part, it's just, the Scuttlebutt. It's the gossip. It's the whatever's going on in the world and what we think about it, usually very poorly thought out discussions. And
well, that makes it easy, right? Less research always makes it easy, huh?
we had that actually come up not too long ago, where a buddy brought up something about the two towers. That Pakistan, was it Pakistan or something, had an airline like ad or something. And I was like, is this legit? He's like, well, I'm not going to research. I'm not going to find out. I just want to talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like I recently, I used to be a motocross racer, and I'm still like a big dirt bike, supercross, motocross fan. It's like the only sport I watch now. And I was like, I've got all this equipment. Like I watch all of these motocross podcasts and motocross videos all day. Like, why don't I just start trying to make those videos? And I haven't like released one yet because I've recorded like 4 or 5 of them, and I haven't really been happy with them. But right away I was like, oh man, this is so much easier. Like I don't have to do any research. Like I know all of this stuff like the back of my hand, so I can just rant and roll. Oh, it's so much nicer than having to do all the freaking research.
Exactly. That's a good spot to be in. And a buddy of mine. So there's 3 of us on the show, Morpheus and Theron, and Morpheus is always like the chaotic one. He's like, I'm just gonna shoot from the hip. I don't care. And he recently reminded us, he's like, dude, let's just keep it fun. Let's not take this too serious. Let's just keep having fun. That's all I'm about. And I was like, you know what? You're totally right, Morpheus. You're totally right.
Yeah.
Let's keep it fun.
And I should probably take that advice to heart too. Like I do so much research on this shit. And then like me and my buddy do our weekly podcast where it's like news and what's going on in the world, like war and money and, all the major stuff that's happening. And it's like, I get done with it and I'm like, man, I didn't do it as good as this person. And I forgot to say this and I forgot to say that. And it'd probably just be a whole lot more easy if I just went, you know what? I'm not going to research it. I'm just going to say what I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's nice to, especially if you're already into myself, I read a lot as it is. So,
Me too.
Whatever topic it is, I usually have heard or read or something, whether what I read was right or whether it was, whatever. But I don't know if that's already what you're doing for certain topics, then I think it's entertaining to hear what everybody's got to think, even if it's, like I said, poorly thought out opinion.
Yeah.
I like to hear everybody's opinion nonetheless.
And that's what's great about podcasts. Like you don't have to have this tight ass news show with your, what do they call it? The teleprompter where you're reading off all the crap. I like it that in a podcast, like I can have a video, you can have your background, and it's just like, yeah, whatever, who cares? It's a podcast,
Yeah, exactly. And that's if the ratings of teleprompter, old media is any indication, it's nobody else seems to like it either. I think more people are into the podcast, so or the YouTube or whatever it is. That's what I was watching before we hopped on here, was just some YouTube,
Me too.
Usual suspects. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's an interesting medium, right? Like it's allowed people, like when we were, I think you're probably around my age. I don't actually know how old you are now that I think about it, but from the sounds of it, I think we're probably right in there. Like when we were kids, the thought of having your own TV show was like asinine. It's like, oh, you can never have your own TV show. You got to go to college and you got to go to Hollywood, and then you take, millions of dollars worth of equipment. But like here me and you are with our own TV shows. And this cost me $1,000. It's like, yeah. And I could have done it for a whole lot cheaper if I was a little more like savvy with technology.
Fair. It's a great point. And that's the beauty of technology. Yeah, I think we are about the same age, and growing up, like I remember thinking that, dial up was like, oh my God, that's the craziest thing in the world that somebody in Japan, and I mean, even before that, when it was like ham radios, it's like, oh my God,
Yeah.
somebody in Chicago can talk to me right now. But then it's like, oh, now we can instantly talk, on like Yahoo Messenger. And how wild is that? We have these groups that get together and these chat rooms that get together. That's wild. And here we are, lo and behold, over 2 decades later, we're instantly streaming
Yeah.
HD video from my studio to yours. It's pretty wild.
Yeah. And the fact that like the elites just hate it. They just hate it. They think it's dirty and disgusting and like they want it to be gone so bad. Like technology is such a double-edged sword for the ruling elite because the more technology they create for themselves to use for control, the more we get as a byproduct that we can fight back on their control. It's kind of like, everybody's worried about, oh my God, as soon as quantum computers come out, like they're going to be able to crack any code, any encryption's going to be done. But like when you really talk to people who know things about quantum computers, they're like, yeah, but quantum encryption is going to develop alongside quantum, computers. So you're just going to have better encryption. So
Right.
it's like kind of this double-edged sword thing, right? Where they get theirs, but we also get ours.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the idea. I mean, the arms race, right? I mean, whether it's weaponry or whether it's surveillance or technology in general, it's always an arms race with who's going to have it and who's going to use it for what, right? And nuclear power, for example, we can use it for a bomb or we can use it for a power plant, And I think a good portion of a lot of this technology in the average Joe's hand that I've seen with it is this connection. Like everybody complains how disconnected we are, but it's almost like what you're using it for. I've only, everybody complains about Twitter, but I've only found like good interactions on Twitter. I only have, other podcasts. I only have other, like fitness motivators. Like that's all I have. So that's basically all my algorithm is. It doesn't give me, shitty videos. And that there was a time when, you're first getting your bearings online where that's not the case. And so it's really easy to just find a random beheading video and you're like, oh shit, this
Yeah.
is all that there is on the internet, right? Like, oh my
Yeah.
God, the world is ending. It's everybody's fighting each other. But and that's not true. There's
Yeah.
certainly a lot of
Right.
fighting going on, but I think it's just how we cater to it. And I think with the more average Joes having hands on these kinds of things and innovating a lot of these things, like you said, we have our own quote unquote TV shows, we
Yeah.
have our own show, we have our own productions, and because of that, I feel like there's more space for that general like leveling out, whether because if you only have one person in control of like the TV, NBC or ABC or whatever, then you kind of get what we've kind of got this, for however many years. It's only their agenda, or it's only their opinion, or only their idea of what should be discussed or what shouldn't be discussed is a big one now. And when you have the average Joe, like we kind of get this leveling out. It's like, no, I don't think that's a crazy idea to talk about whatever, anarchism or
Yeah.
abortion, or I don't think it's that crazy to talk about legalization of marijuana or, vice versa. And you have that leveling out where it's like this social, like this giant consciousness now with it being a globally connected thing. I think a lot of these factions where we have a lot of these, differing ideas, extreme differing ideas are hopefully starting to come back to that like melting pot of normalcy and we're all going to find that middle ground kind of a thing.
I
That's
hope
the
so. Like
optimist, right?
yeah, right. Like I get that optimist view. Like I hear people sometimes with that optimist view too that are like a little too tied into it. And there's certain situations where it's like, yeah, we all really do have a lot more in common than we don't. But there are certain situations now where like there's people that I grew up with in California. I lived in San Francisco for 5 years that like I was great friends with 5, 10 years ago. And now it's like we have absolutely nothing in common. They just think that I'm a crazy person.
Yeah. Well, and that's another thing with travel and like small town mentalities, I guess. You
Yeah.
can you can have small town mentality in a big city. And I use the same, example of, friends that I went to school with or even people that I worked with, around college age time. And yeah, it's like I don't I've been off Facebook for a while now, so I don't update, but like
Yeah.
my wife will try to like, "Oh my God, did you see what so and so did?" I'm like, "Nope, I'm really glad I didn't," because
Yeah. Right.
that sounds like idiocy, but that's a big part of it is, they never you never I have family members like that. You never leave the same town you were born in, you grew up in, or you don't, what's the last book you read outside the Bible or whatever it is, right? It's like you got to expand those horizons, and a lot of people just frankly don't. So yeah, I mean, the foundation that you have to pull from to talk to somebody else with is pretty shallow, you know, with a lot of those cases. Again, nothing wrong if that's what makes you happy, but yeah, for me, I don't know. I also couldn't have a conversation with them. I don't think, you know, when it's closed mind anyways.
It's
I
it's
grew up with a
it's
lot of
wild,
religions.
yeah. Like, and I grew up in a small town. Like, I'm from Northern California. We had 5,000 people in the town that I grew up in, and it was very small. Like, you knew everybody back in the early '90s. Sorry, my dog is going crazy right now. And now you go back there, and it's just a completely different town. Like,
Yeah.
it's probably grown 3x in size. Like, the entire downtown now is more like wine country than it was just a small town. And like, they forced it so hard that they actually made a lot of the local businesses go bankrupt because they were like, okay, we're going to, turn ourselves into wine country and make ourselves into a tourist attraction town. We're going to completely revamp the boulevard. We're going to, reface all the buildings, make everything look all nice. And then we're going to jack rent up. And,
Oh yeah.
we'll just get better businesses. We'll get better coffee shops, boutique, clothing shops, things like that. And they brought a couple of these places in, and then like everything just closed down. Like my uncle owned a gym on that boulevard, and he sold the building to a theater company. The building was a theater originally, so he built a gym out of it, then sold it to the theater company for like 5 times what he paid for it. And now it's an empty building.
Oh, that's I mean, there's it's the system we live in a way. So I see good and I see bad, just like anything else. We can bitch about it or we can highlight about it, I guess. And there's a lot, like I said, I don't know, man. There's a lot on both sides of it these days. I keep seeing the side. I mean, good for was it your grandpa you said is good? I mean, good for
Uncle,
him
yeah,
to uncle, sorry. Good for him to sell it and like make
right?
something and have a nice little nest. I mean, that's awesome for him. But now, yeah, like you said, now it's an empty building. It's like not even serving a purpose. And like you said, it's just increasing rent prices all around because now you have empty buildings that are useless that nobody can afford. It's
Yeah.
like, what do you do with that kind of a thing? I don't mean like capitalism has its pros, it has a lot of cons these days, especially I think, again, the way that we're using it. That's the big problem I see a lot of times. It's like people use things in I know it makes profit, but it's so stupid. Like that's
Yeah.
all it seems to be about. A lot of times, like I don't know. It's like the show. You and I, we enjoy making the show, right? I
Yeah.
assume you enjoy
Oh, I
getting
do.
to meet people and talk to people, and that's fun. Why I don't get why. I don't know. And obviously there is profit to be made here. Whether it's millions of dollars or not. I just think that's I don't know. That should be the driving force a lot more often. Unfortunately, it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, it's not really a function of capitalism. It's a function of government where we start to get into nasty areas. So
Oh
like
yeah.
if Cloverdale, the town that I was from, if they'd have just said, hey, look, we want to be a tourist attraction town. So we are going to make, policies that are going to make it easy for businesses to come in here and do their thing and watch this happen organically. But what happened was is they forced it, and they were like, we're going to make this. The market doesn't want that. The market just wants this to be a sleepy little town, but we think that it can be something better. So we're going to force this on everybody. And so like when my uncle bought that gym, that building, he everybody in my family told him, don't do it. It's a bad move. Like you're going to lose all your money. My grandfather was big into the stock market at the time. He's like, this, just listen to this Jim Cramer guy. He'll make you millions of dollars. This building, what's that going to do for you? And then, come to find out 10, 20 years later, like Jim Cramer is a dirty bastard who leads everybody down the wrong path. Everybody who told him that it was, a bad investment are all broke now while he's sitting pretty. And to me, like, that's not really a function of like capitalism going wrong. It's a function of like government dicking with capitalism, which is why you get somebody like Jim Cramer who makes all of his money on TV and loses everything he puts into the market.
No, yeah, no, yeah, no. I couldn't agree more with the government's inadequacy and inability. I mean, and especially the bloated
Yeah.
bureaucratic mess that we have right now with it. So I'm active duty military.
Mhm.
All I see is the bureaucracy and the hindrance that it's creating for all of it, for myself or any of the brothers and sisters. and it's pointless. And the amount of money that we waste with it, almost as like you said, almost as like a function of the system, just by being government. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous.
It's designed to steal from us, devalue our currency, and turn us into slaves while enriching themselves. Like every time they print money, they love it because they can buy the old assets at old prices. And then once inflation kicks in, they're sitting pretty while people like us are out in the snow.
Well, I mean, again, don't get me started on inflation. Morpheus, my buddy, a big libertarian side of the house, and I mean, there's a nice little picture I think he has up on his wall, or maybe it was a meme he had, that it was a block or a bar of gold, and it's like bar of gold in 1900 worth X amount, and it's like bar of gold worth, or the exact same weight worth X amount today. And it's like inflation is just the only difference here. The bar of gold has not changed. The weight is the same. Everything. It's basically, it's just a copy paste picture. And it's just, yeah, it's ridiculous. It really is. And especially these days when, the armed forces just got a little pay raise, and and again, I'm not going to say no to more money, but it's like the amount that they gave us is the biggest it's ever going to be that it's ever been in like the last 20 years, right? It's like it was like 5.2 to their base pay, right? And it's inflation though for this same amount of time is what, like 11 or 15% in the exact same time frame. So it's yeah, great. Give me 5% of the 15 you already stole from me.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks. I guess I'll settle for the 10% theft. It's better than 15. It's like, it's some of it gets frustrating, but at the same time, I don't know. I mean, anarchy though is an idea, is an interesting idea. I was more on the anarchist spectrum. If you break down what is the little, the little pie chart, or
the Venn diagram.
Or the Venn diagram. Yeah, exactly. I got so I had more on the anarchy side, and I'm curious then why. What was your process to get to that, or how have you come to that conclusion now?
Yeah, good question. Interesting. So, like I said earlier, I grew up as a motocross racer, and when I was like 3 or 4 years old, they would put me on my dad's four-wheeler or my dad's bike, and they would take us out like over to the river in Cloverdale. We were on the Russian River, so we go out on the river, head down to the levee, and just ride forever. You could go forever out there. And then they put in a freeway overpass, and then we're like, well, now that the freeway's here, you can't ride anywhere. And then the areas just started shrinking and shrinking and shrinking until literally you could not ride anywhere in Cloverdale anymore. And at that point, like, I was on bigger bikes, so we were starting to go up into the mountains and stuff like that. And the government went at war with two-stroke engines. They were like, these two-strokes they're dangerous. They're going to burn the forest down. They pollute. They're dirty, blah, 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 blah. So the motorcycle industry, the entire industry was like, well, we need to get on board with this four-stroke thing. Otherwise, the government's just going to come in and shut us down. So they forced it. They spent way more money than they should have to develop a four-stroke bike, probably 10 years earlier than it should have been. And they go, hey, look, if you buy this four-stroke, now you can go out into the hills whenever you want. If you keep riding this two-stroke, you can only go during the wintertime, which it's rained out most of the time in the winter anyway. So it's like, okay, we'll buy these four-strokes. And then immediately, within like 5 years, they go, four-strokes get the red sticker now too. So you can only ride those in the winter now as well. So at that point, like, I knew, and also as a kid, I got in a lot of trouble a couple of times, but for things that I didn't find to be horribly immoral, like I got in a ton of trouble for hazing in high school. And one cop like made it his mission to destroy our lives. Everybody saw it. It was like, even people within the school are like, this is fucked up. Like, what are they doing to these kids? Like, you can't just, if the guy would have gotten his way, I'd have went to jail for like 5 years as a 17-year-old. And I, like, going out of high school, I moved down to Southern California, ride some more dirt bikes, get in some more trouble, get arrested a couple of times. And I end up like cleaning up, getting hurt, doing the whole thing. Like, once I get hurt, I'm basically just sitting around my house. And at one point I like ran out of stuff to watch on TV. I was like, well, let's open up the internet. And I kind of got into YouTube, and I just found these people who were anarchists, who were libertarians. It kind of started with like, they'd come on Joe Rogan and just talk about it a little bit. And then it's like, oh, well, let's go listen to their podcasts. And as soon as I started listening to these people, guys like Michael Malice and Dave Smith was a big one. it was like, oh my God, these guys are saying things that I've believed for my entire life, but I've never been able to like vocalize. That I just didn't have the ability to say those things. And to me, like anarchy is some skateboard kid with a t-shirt spray painting a wall. That's kind of how I thought of it. But when you really like start reading about it and you read people like Rothbard, you realize that it's not that at all. Like anarchy means without rulers, not without rules. So everything
Right.
would be basically structured with voluntary interactions and property rights. And to me, that was just a beautiful way of putting it. It clicked with me immediately. Like I didn't really have to read a ton of it. Like I listened to these guys for a year. I read a couple books and just right away I was like, oh wow, this all just makes sense to me. So it was like a kind of a slow roll. But then once I really got into it, it was like, yeah, this is just me.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was a similar, conclusion when I started. I mean, especially when you first start recognizing the issues that we
Yeah.
currently have in the system, it's like, okay, well, obviously what we have going on is not, and even when we were first set up as a country wasn't what was intended. It isn't
Mm-mm.
what I believe the forefathers would have wanted,
Yeah.
founding fathers would have wanted. So
The Wild West was a whole lot nicer and a whole lot less wild than we're led to believe. Like it was the most prosperous time for any country in the history of the world with very
but
little government.
right. Well, it comes down to, I think, how we want to live, and I think that's where, again, I don't claim affiliation to anything, and Morpheus always tries to, pin me as he's like, you sound a real libertarian there. I'm
You
like, well,
do.
then it sounds libertarian right now, but but I don't know. It's the idea of the faith, I guess, in
Mhm.
humanity, right? It's always ideal when you're, like when Morpheus is like trying to explain, he's like, well, libertarian this, libertarian that. I'm like, yeah, that's great because you have an IQ, of plus 80, right?
Yeah,
But like a
exactly.
majority of people I have met, and I would argue, especially in the States, probably fall below that line.
Yeah, they're
For
midwits.
whether it's a lack of education or otherwise, right? I think that's where the anarchy for me breaks down in like my
Mhm.
brain. It's like I don't know how I would personally, because I don't want kids, never have, never wanted them, never will, and it's because I can't imagine having to be responsible for this many other things other than myself. It's already bad enough when I have to figure out, like protection is a big one, right? It's
Mhm.
like you can't call on the cops to protect you, right?
Right.
So I've always taken that Second Amendment through and through. And yet I see the opposite side where, like I have a bunch of friends, I was overseas for a while. I have a bunch of friends over in like the UK
Mhm.
and Australia, and they're always like, well, this is what we have here and this is why it works here. And I disagree with it, and I vehemently argue the opposite
Yeah.
point, but most of them don't want to have the alternative. So why I say it comes down to like what we want as a society. I
Mhm.
think, what majority of people want in city limits, for example, right? That's why electric cars are such a fucking big push right
Nightmare.
now, is because yeah, I disagree with the implementation
Yeah.
for sure. But the reason why it's so big is because the desire of anybody within the city limits is no more than 20 miles at any given time.
Mhm.
Everything you need is within 20. And that's why metros work so well. And that's why Japan is set up the way it is. But I think that has to take into consider. I think we have to take that into consideration when I'm thinking of like how we would set up something as large as the US currently is for like an overall consensus to ever be like achieved in terms of whether it's government or self-government. I think self-government, we're going to see a thinning of the, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe
Yeah.
that is. I'm not
Yeah,
going to say it's
right?
not. But at the same time, that may include some family members. So that's a hard conversation to have, right? It's
Yeah.
like, well, do you think you're going to survive that? Like, are you, how capable are you? And like, I think myself included, overestimate our capabilities sometimes, because there's been a million times where I've started a fire and there's not a problem starting a fire. But then there's that one time where you go camping, all of a sudden you get
Yeah.
pissed rained on, and all of a sudden you're screwed. And you're like, okay, today was the day we really needed the fire, and now we don't have one. So it's like, I think I have overestimated my own abilities, even abilities that I claim to have and have displayed having in the past. And I think that's where the collective a collective anarchy rather, or like a communal anarchy, kind of breaks down into more of the libertarian side that I
Mhm.
think Morpheus has sold me on. But
Well, they're kind of one
again,
and the same, essentially. Like you could have a libertarian government, which would be like a night watchman state, but essentially, the libertarian, you know,
wet dream
axis
ethos.
well, there's like an axis to it. You know, you can be anywhere from like a borderline communist to an anarcho-capitalist like myself, and then like a night watchman state would kind of
Sure.
fall in there between. I worry about the midwits as well, but the way I kind of see it is like the midwits are going to fall into place for whatever system that they have to exist in. Like they're not really looking to push the boundaries of whatever is going on anyways. Like they're just going to go through their lives, watch football, and go to work no matter what. Like that's just
Right.
kind of what they're going to do. And like you said with the cop thing, like you can't trust the cops to take care of you. And I think it breaks down to a point where it's like you're always going to have to worry about those people. You just have to have more people with more guns who are willing to live in equilibrium than
Right.
the people who are willing to rock the boat. And in a system like that, I believe that these midwits would kind of just fall into place and go, okay, I'm just going to keep, they would just kind of do their thing. But again, like who really knows? It's not something I think that's going to happen anytime soon. Like not in my
Yeah.
lifetime. That's for dang sure. I would
Yeah,
be
sure.
happy if the federal government spends itself into bankruptcy and they go, hey, look, we've got to shut down all these military bases and just kind of come in and focus on domestic issues. Like to me, that would be great. And I'm sure like for somebody in the military, active duty, I can't imagine how terrifying it must be to look at the people in charge and go, these people can like send me to die if they want to, really at any time.
Yeah. I mean, well, that is a conversation, and frequently, my wife and I are both active military, and that's a conversation we frequently have. Is like, there's no trust and that's the thing. You even talk to, I'd say 10 years ago, who you would consider to be leaders or the leadership, and you had a sense that, okay, well, they're doing sort of like when you're in high school, right? And you're like, well, how do I pay taxes? How do I buy a house? How do I
Mhm.
buy a car, right? There's just these questions because you don't have life experience yet that you have, right?
Correct.
And you look to the leadership above you, your teachers, your parents, your whatever, the cops, whatever, and they have at least those answers. So you kind of have a little bit of faith. You're like, okay, well, they have something figured out. But then you get to that position and you're like, okay, well, you ask them, well, what about, like a long-term goal, or like, how did you compute, like your average monthly budget, or how did you, incorporate, like the interest rate for your house versus your car versus all this stuff. Like when you bought it, it was obviously way lower. How am I supposed to compensate for that now? And all of a sudden you start picking apart a lot of these quote unquote leaders that you had. And it's like, you don't actually have it figured out. You kind of were I just assumed you did at the
Yeah.
time because you had more
Right.
than I had figured out. And so I think currently in the military, that's where a lot of enlisted officer all the way up the chain is experience is that's the position we're all in right now, because I'm in the medical community, and that's one thing that the medical community has that a lot of other ranks within the armed forces don't have, is direct access to higher leadership within your scope.
Mm.
So it's like we'll talk to captains very frequently. A captain will be a doctor very frequently, and you're working directly under them, with them, assisting them, etc. Whereas other ranks, you're kind of only one or two ranks, and then maybe like the chiefs or the chiefs master, like the E7s kind of a thing. It's all pretty equal, basically. There's only like one or two separations there, whereas a captain is 6 separations from me, but yet we're talking as people, as humans, as you should. So there's not like that butt
Breakdown.
pucker moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's not that intimidation factor. And so
I see. Okay.
and so you talk to them, and and more over these years now, I've been talking, like this recent captain I have, and he's like, yeah, you're not the only one feeling this. Like basically anything he's bitching about is the same thing I'm bitching about, and we're all bitching about the same thing. And it comes down to like, who's actually above every officer in the military, every enlisted in the military. And it's like, it's the senators, it's the politicians, and it's like the admirals who are doing the exact same thing, basically trying to be politicians. The
Yeah.
admirals who run the show right now at least as far as the military is concerned, are either taking a shitty advice from people who've never been in the military, aka the politicians, or they're giving shitty, or they're just accepting the shitty advice that they're, peddling off so that they can hopefully further their career and become a politician.
Yeah,
So they
because
can
they're
then go,
political animals. After like one star, they're political appointments, not like yeah.
yeah, yeah, and it's a fucking shame because I don't want to speak out of turn because I didn't know him personally, but
Sure.
there was so my buddy Morpheus, he hasn't brought it up on the show. It's not public knowledge out there, so this is just between you and me and whoever your audience is.
Breaking
I know he
news.
won't care. Yeah, I know he won't care necessarily, but again, I'd rather him speak on it. But his captain off of his last deployment took his own life recently,
Ugh.
and it's another one of those examples where my Morpheus texts me. He's like, "Hey man, I got some like shitty news. Like so and so, my previous CO just killed himself." And he's like, he was, I just talked to him, and he was one of those good leaders that we needed. He was personable. He cared about everybody in the ship, and this is a big ship. It's not like, it's a few thousand people, so it's like he had a lot of people to know and be under. And he's a personal guy, and he has a family. He's got and that's what he went to the funeral, and he's like, man, I feel bad for my CO's dog. He's like, he doesn't understand where he went. He doesn't understand why he's not coming back. He doesn't understand any of this. And I was just like, well, I mean, I wanted to make him feel better, but it was like, my buddy Morpheus, I want to make him feel better. But at the same time, we were both like, the ones that we still, if we were in high school, look to as our leadership, right? As our teachers, our captains, our COs, the ones who are driving the fucking ship, are also just as lost in all of this as we are. They are just as let down by the politicians, by the admirals, by the chain of command. And so much so that they're forced into a corner more and more and more. And that's, an immediate example right there that just happened this last month, right after the holidays. It's just like, what the fuck do you even do with that? How do you be hopeful in a situation like that? It's like, because it's a huge breakdown across the ranks. Everybody's looking up and there's nothing up there other than the problems we see, where politicians, and I mean, how many days they work 100 out of the year. Meanwhile, we're working 300. It's like, it is a serious breakdown. It is a serious breakdown when it comes to that.
I'm going to have to be very careful right now because could sound very, very bad. And I'm not talking about like the CO committing suicide. That's a horrible tragedy. For someone like me who thinks that our military is out of control, not the enlisted members yourself, but the people in charge.
Oh no, the budget, the size,
the whole
scope,
thing.
Absolutely.
It's out of control. So like the fact that enlisted members are going, what the fuck are we doing here? And then you've got news breaking like, hey, we're going to start letting immigrants enlist and we'll give them, citizenship when they enlist and they want to serve for our military. It's like, in a way, that's good news because it's showing that the American public are going, hey, like we're not willing to let our children go die for these monsters anymore. And that's a good thing in a lot of ways. But like the way that it's affecting the people who are coming to the realization of that is just terrible. Like I can't imagine. Like I've worked jobs before where I've known that my boss is an idiot. I've known that I'm working with people that are idiots. When I was working my line working job, a guy that I was working with who was a superior to me made 2 major mistakes and almost killed people within like a week. And they didn't fire the guy. And I was telling my ex-wife at the time, I go, you know what? If they don't fire this guy, I'm going to quit. Like, this is just crazy that they're letting this guy stay. And then they fired him like the next week. So I stayed and then look what happens. I got hurt. So like I can't imagine like my boss couldn't force me to do something. And I get like the military can't exactly force you to do anything either, but a lot more than I can. They can, threaten your livelihood, which is in my mind force. If they go, hey, look, if you don't do this, you're out of here. You're going to lose your pension. You're going to lose all your shit. Like that's force to me. Like it's got to be just a terrifying situation. And it's not even like you can go, oh, if we get a new president in there, everything's going to be good. Like I'm not a Trump guy, but like I'm not a Biden guy either. But it's like I don't think it's going to make a difference with either one of them in there because you've got this bureaucratic state and this uniparty of senators and congressmen that just want war. And then you got companies like Raytheon and Lockheed Martin and Boeing that, are just making a killing off of this stuff and with zero morality attached to themselves.
Yeah. And you know, that's the, so like part of me is again wants to go back to that's kind of where the anarchy and libertarian portion also where I'm like, okay, that's why I'm not in this camp, because the ideals that I hold and I would like others to hold, I feel are just so unattainable for a vast majority. And, you know, the big, especially the more people you get involved, you know, so if I'm, you know, 85% whatever, you know, libertarian,
Yeah, sure.
and then Morpheus is 100%, right? That little bit, we're still great friends and we can still,
Absolutely.
you know, cohabitate the same area and agree with, you know, what needs to be done, whether it's build the fucking road or fix the roof or whatever. But then you have, maybe we bring 2 more people in and they're maybe like 60 and 50, and then we get 30 and 40 and so on. And once you get to 20 people or 100 people, those little differences start stacking up. And that's what the US is. So I completely agree. It's not going to matter who the hell is in office, who's the talking head of the US. I mean, I think we're pretty quickly more and more learning that no, I don't think the US is what we thought it was, you know, when we were
Absolutely.
growing up.
Yeah. No,
It's the best country in the world, in my opinion. I still wouldn't want to live anywhere else. I've lived in a lot of other places, and I would still prefer to live in the States,
yeah.
especially in this. I mean, in certain states, I would prefer to live there over other states, even. But it is, I think, part of the issue. I mean, I think self-denial. I think that's the issue right now. Is a lot of people would still prefer not to acknowledge a lot of these issues because, again, they do love their country, they do love their family, they do love their neighbors, and they want that to be the only reality they live in, is this love. But at the same time, and I agree, that's great I wish that was the case, but I personally, I can't bury my head in the sand with a lot of those things. And it seems like a lot of people would prefer that to be the case, you know, just, you know, be on TikTok or watch football or whatever it is. And you'll probably live a happier life. Ignorance is bliss, right?
Oh yeah.
Sure.
My friends are very happy watching football and going to work every day and not thinking about anything. They love it. Like, just ignorance is bliss. Yeah. Like I don't know if you watched I guess it wasn't the last, whatever Republican debate it was that Pence was still in there. And he kind of gave this like Morning in America speech where it's like, we just got to pull ourselves up from our bootstraps and get the American dream and all this crap. And then Vivek Ramaswamy was just like, what are you talking about? Like, that is ridiculous. This is not 1950. Like, people our age can't afford to buy homes. It's wild. Like, I got priced out of California when I got hurt. It was, you know, I was making great money in San Francisco. I took an entry-level job in North Dakota where I wasn't making shit. I get hurt on that wage. And then it's like, oh, I can't stay in California anymore. I have to move to Idaho, which was a great move. I got in before COVID, you know, inflation prices, and I bought a really nice house for $215,000. But now I have guys who are, you know, I've got a kid living in one of my rooms now. He's born and raised in Idaho. He's an electrician, and he's renting a room in my house instead of buying his own. And it makes me feel like shit because I'm doing the same thing to him that all of these assholes in California did to me. Just price you out and goodbye, we don't care. And it's like, you know, where's he going to move? Wyoming? Alabama? Like, there's very few places left in this country where you can go and get decent real estate.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I just had the conversation with the wife this morning, you know, over breakfast. Is like, we're planning PCS this year. So that means we're going to be moving. We have an idea of where that's going to be. And I was like, the only hope that we have of not, because right now we're renting, and I was like, the only hope we have of not renting in the next spot is if the housing market crashes between now and then. That's the only chance we have. If it crashes, then, you know, hopefully we can grab one of like the VA loans, and then we can, you know, buy something there, hopefully turn a profit, because we know we're going to leave there in 4 years, you know, turn a profit, because the housing market crashed when we got there. We bought something cheap. It started to go up just a little bit, and we pay off the loan and pocket the profit. That's like best case scenario. The likelihood of this happening, though, for anybody in any other situation, I mean, even in our situation, because she and I, again, we don't want kids. So we're dual income, no kids. That's nice. And that's ideal, I guess, for our situation. But a lot of people, you know, want families, they want houses, they want these things. And I don't understand why that's a crazy thing to want. I mean, it is crazy for me to think about, because the amount of money and effort and time that you're spending on a child, child care, education, food, living, all of it, right?
Yeah.
And those are mandatory things. You can't not give your child a life to live, right?
Right.
I mean, but and that's the decision a lot of people have. So to me, it's like, nope, I'm gonna opt out of that one.
Yeah.
And even dual income, no kids, we're sitting here like, okay, can we feasibly do a house in the next 10 years? Is this possible for us? And it's like, well, maybe. Again, if the housing market crashes, if if we get a pay raise of 50% to our salaries, not 5% kind of a thing. It's
Yeah.
like, how else can you afford these kinds of things? I mean, again, inflation alone, like we have luckily the area we're living in is very, I would say, self-sufficient in a lot of ways
Yeah.
for some things. And so we have a nice older gentleman who has a big hen house, more eggs than he can eat. Would you like some eggs? People down the road, neighbors and whatnot. Oh, absolutely. We'd love.
That's awesome.
Here's $5. Here's $10, whatever. We would love to have farm fresh eggs, and know the source, know what they're eating, etc. And therefore, we missed a lot of that inflation. But like the other day, I went and it was like $7 for a dozen eggs or something like that for like quote unquote farm fresh, whatever they're labeling, whatever lie they labeled the eggs that day. But it's like, how would anybody, again, raising kids, raising a family, possibly be able to keep up with this, inflation being one of them. But then to your point of like, rent,
Yeah.
the rent since we've been here has gone up 3 times,
Yeah, it's
every
crazy.
time we try to, every time we renew, and that's still cheaper than anything else around right now that you can get either for a house or renting. 2-bedroom, 2-bath, anything comparable to that is at least is
Yeah.
probably another grand on top of what we're paying right here. So it's just like, and again, because I came back during COVID, so nobody was anywhere, nobody could do anything, everything was locked down, so everything basically was getting collected up by the larger was it like realty companies, I guess, were buying a lot of these houses and a lot of these things to rent. And luckily, we're just in the military area where it's friends and family kind of selling and buying to each other. And I'm sure the guy that is renting to you is probably getting a better deal than he would if he was on like if he was renting from Realty Corporation XYZ.
Oh yeah.
he'd probably
There's
get-
an apartment complex down the street from my house that's like $2,000 a month. It's crazy.
for a room,
Yeah.
for a single
For a
fucking
single
room.
bedroom apartment.
That's what exactly. And so at the same time, that's again where anarchy, where my like trust is like, can we, if there was absolutely no regulation I'm not saying regulation is the answer because it's
Mhm.
not, but like, the idea of regulatory bodies, whether it's like we all agree to go a certain speed limit or we all agree whatever. That's a bad example, but
Well, there's
the-
actually answers to that. So like in for the speed limit one, I like this. Like right now we've got government roads. You drive on any freeway in America and you're going to get the shit kicked out of you by bumps and they're widening everything. We would just have private roads. So in a private road, you would be able to sell advertisements just like on a government road, you would have your billboards and stuff like that. And that would allow this private company to come in and take care of this road a whole lot better. And they would also be able to set the rules on their road because it's their property. So they can go, hey, look, you drive 70 miles an hour or you're not allowed to drive on our road again. If we catch you driving over 75 more than 3 times, you're just off the road. That's it. And then you got to wait or however you set it up, and
that's the regulation we're agreeing to, right? That's the
exactly,
point, right?
exactly. And that's property rights and voluntary interaction. So I volunteer to use your property. I'm going to pay, $10 a month or maybe zero. Like maybe the company who's running the road can make a profit off it without charging people a lot of money. Because if you're selling advertisements based on people driving on your road, maybe you don't even need to charge them. Like
And we're just going to trust this private company. I mean,
Yeah.
And again, I agree. We're going to trust the private company not to want to make increase profits. Like their baseline for the road probably is, and their overhead and their maintenance probably is, X, and their profit is Y. Why don't they want to maximize Y after this? X isn't that much.
Sure.
It's not-
Well, that's where competition comes in. So you can just build another road, and this company can go and build a road 10 miles outside of town. And they can say, hey, look, we're going to have an expressway that goes from Nampa to Boise. And you don't have to, and a lot of this would be, this is a hard experiment to do because like roads have already been laid down and everything like that.
Yeah.
So it would be tough to like transfer to a system like that. But in a true free market, you would have competition to where somebody can say, you know what, I can build this better, I can maintain it better, I can sell more advertisements, and I can offer you a better deal to travel on my road rather than theirs. So like a place where this could work with like in actual practice in the world today is on bridges, right? So bridges in New York, San Francisco, the Bay Area, you have to pay a ton of money to cross the dang things. Where if you would lease the bridge to a private company, just as is right now, and there's many private companies who have come in and said, we would love to do this. You could just lease them the bridge and they could sell their advertisements. They could sell tickets, however they want to do it. And it would just be their problem from then on. And I've heard companies that would love to do this.
And see, that's a great idea. And in practice, I see cartels getting set up because, you have somebody, you're competing against another person. What do we do? Well, let's just take out the competition. That's what we had.
Well, what do we have
when
now?
I was overseas. Again,
cartels.
We definitely do. Especially some people don't like to admit the fact. Yeah. Well, they don't like to admit the fact that, the cops being funded the way they are in physical intimidation being the mode of, enforcement. For a majority, I mean, what happens if you were to run away from the cops, right? You're risking imprisonment. And so a lot of people don't like to admit that, but that's kind of what I see happening as an inevitability, which is why I think the regulation portion is probably why we have leaned on it so heavily. Now, again, do I have a solution to solve it? No, I just always am able to like see something like, yes, that's good on paper. Just like regulation on paper should work, right? But then you have, politicians going around it. There's a loophole here. There's a whatever, right? And then the regulation gets a little bit more this way, and then it's going to actually favor that one company. And now we have, this like basically corporate welfare. We have, this, illusion.
It's a gnarly system that we live in, right? It's a real trip. And like monopolies are never going to be good, right? But we have monopolies everywhere now. Like the cops own a monopoly on force and violence, and the government owns a monopoly on force and violence. Like internationally, we have monopolies in energy all over this country. So like California announces, we're going to make you have an electric car by 2025. That same week, they go, hey, please don't charge your electric cars because we don't have the energy right now. And that's a monopoly issue. So like in California, my dad used to work for Pacific Gas and Electric. It's one of the biggest power companies in the country, probably in the world. And they own all of Northern California. So if you came in and go, hey, look, I like electric cars. I think we should all drive these, and I think it would save the planet, and I want to do this for the right reasons, not to get rich and make money. So I'm going to go start my own energy company, and we're going to do a better job. Wrong. The government will not allow you to do that. So now we get things like, look at nuclear energy, right? In the 50s, nuclear energy was the future of energy. And then regulations and regulations and regulations. Yeah. And the line is like the narrative for nuclear energy is it was dangerous, but now we've fixed it and we're just being very careful and building it. But that's not how it was at all. Like the nuclear energy destroyed themselves. Like they were like, hey, look, these reactors that aren't actually dangerous, we have the solution for them. And why don't you give us a bunch of money and then we'll regulate the shit out of it so we're the only ones who can build them. And now we've got like half a dozen nuclear reactors in this country and we're so low on energy that like, I don't know what we're going to do. Like this is one of my favorite things about climate change is like all of these kids who think that we're all going to be boiling and dying in 30 years. What are they going to do 10, 15, 20 years when they've had 8 years of Joe Biden or 8 years of Hillary Clinton and they still haven't fixed the issue and we're still burning more fossil fuels every year than the previous year? Like they're going to lose their minds. And I don't know like how we're going to navigate that.
Well, I mean, that was the question and answer I had myself. I mean, during Obama, I mean, I remember very distinctly, thinking like this is like our last chance. And I remember thinking like if I'm going to not be a hypocrite, I'm going to go ahead and put my eggs in this basket. I'm going to push my chips on this bet and I'm going to see what happens. And the first thing that solidified my basically just throwing my arms up in the air and be like, yeah, they're all fucking liars. Nobody's going to fix this. Was, yeah, the Guantanamo example was like,
Yeah.
he swore up and down, I'm going to close this, human rights that. And it's a similar, it's a similar sentiment to the climate change. It's like, we want to do better, you know, or even like the our argument for like veganism, right? It's like, we
Mhm.
want to do better. We want to stop cruelty, this and that. But yet, if you look anywhere below that initial sentiment, you realize how the opposite way this is actually going and how futile your efforts are
Yeah.
actually, you know, and then you realize everybody's also lying on top of it. So it's not even about which one is going to, yeah, fix or not fix. Because like you said, Biden isn't fixing shit.
No.
Clinton's never going to fix shit.
No.
Bush wouldn't fix shit. Nobody's going to fix shit.
No.
That's, I mean, and everybody, when, you know, like I said, I had every illusion shattered when Obama was his first presidency. I was like, okay, wow, they're all the exact same. And everybody, when I was in college, was like, oh, we got to get on the Bernie train. I was like, why? Why would I get on any other fucking train? Yeah, everybody thinks, or you know, whatever. Right now, the wind is blowing towards Bernie Sanders, and everybody thinks that's going to be the solution. I've seen this dog and pony show before.
Mhm.
It's not the solution. It's never going to be the
Yep.
solution. I legitimately do not believe that there was a viable solution after whatever coup or, you know, power structure took over post World War I here in this country. I really don't. I mean, you could argue further back than that, but I can say there's a definite trend post World War I that this country has been going on.
Yeah.
And you know, you can point to a lot of historical events that, I mean, and again, breaks down to, I mean, who does bringing it back towards anarchy again.
Sure.
What do we do? What about the breakdown? I mean, I've read quite a bit of economics. What about the breakdown in like in motivation, right? So, what if there are no companies for this private road, or what if there are no? Because right now that's the problem we have with politicians. Nobody wants to do the job
Mhm.
who should be doing the job. You know, it's supposed to be a public service job, right? Even the military, right? That's why we don't have a draft, is because it's like a volunteer for this public service kind of a thing, or this, you know, this patriotism cause. And yet we don't have those, we don't have the necessary bodies, we don't have the necessary minds, we don't have the necessary, you know,
Mhm.
courage, fortitude, whatever, to do these jobs that require, you know, require time, require effort. And we have the politicians who are using it and you know, to their own advantage, to their own, you know, to their own means. It's like, what do we do when we have a lack of motivation? I mean, it's great when everybody wants to do STEM field
Yeah.
jobs. It's great. Cool. We need doctors, we need lawyers, right? We need artists, we need them all. But we see trends, you know, in the education system where this year or this decade, you know, majority of people are looking at a skill, you know, a trades, you know,
Mhm.
and okay, now we have a bunch of plumbers. Now what happens when we need a doctor? Now we have a bunch of doctors. Okay, now what happens when we need a fucking
Yeah.
plumber?
The ebb and
You
flow,
know?
right? Yeah.
And that's and it's an inevitability, I feel like, in a lot of the time, in a lot of ways. So what do we do to compensate for that? I think government has solved that, or you know, answered that question for themselves and for,
Mhm.
like you said, a majority of the population. I disagree with their solution. I think it's shitty because I don't fall into, you know, one of those blissfully ignorant people. But it does solve that problem when you have, you know, how do we minimum wage? All right, no matter what job you have, it's going to be at least this. So whether you're doing the, you know, the least skilled job out there, and maybe you're an immigrant or whatever, you're trying to build up from something or from nothing into something, you have at least a baseline that we're all meeting. That's great on paper, and I think that sounds nice and everything, and everybody's meeting that minimum level.
Yeah.
But
Until they raise minimum wage to to $20 an hour in fast food restaurants, and they fire 15,000 employees in 2 days
we'll see
last
the
week.
minimum.
You know.
Yeah, I don't think the minimum wage is necessarily the issue on that one, because you know, you look at like our production versus the wage that we've seen in this country. There's obviously a disparity there. Couldn't fucking talk. And it's, again, comes down to this, like, well, are we going to trust a corporation? You know, are we going to trust McDonald's to take the profit that they're getting and put it into the minimum wage to just because this law was enacted? No, they're not. They're going to fucking like you said, they're
Yeah.
going to fire everybody.
They just fire everyone, or
Yeah,
raise their prices. So like the
and
people
raise
who,
their price.
and then like the low income people who depend on McDonald's for dinner every night are now paying more. Like McDonald's is not supposed to be a full-time job. It's supposed to be like a college kid's job or a high school kid's job. Like, it's unfortunate that our country is like economically so broken that like it has to be a viable full-time job now for some people. But
What
you
happens
know,
when school is outrageous? You can't afford
right?
school.
Like,
You know,
oh,
you
I
can't.
just went to college here in Idaho, and it was just, it was unbelievable. Like you're talking like these midwits, like the entire college was midwits. Even my professors, like some of the things that we discussed were just ridiculous, and I just couldn't believe it. Like one of the things that blew me away the most, like the hardest class that I took was on like ancient Greek plays. Like we were reading the Greek tragedies, we were reading Sophocles. So like in this play Antigone like butts heads with the king. The king like is a new king, and he comes in and has a war with the neighboring city state, and he puts out a decree saying you cannot bury the people who we were fighting against. They don't deserve a proper burial. Let the dogs eat them. And the
Mm.
girl comes out and goes, no, that's my brother was there. Like I had one brother on each side, and I'm going to bury my brother. And so Antigone gets sent to death essentially for this because she disobeyed the king. And I couldn't believe it was like the things that people said were like, well, that was the law. She should have followed the law. And
Morally,
right, and
morals
just
aside.
right, and then you read the next two plays, and it shows like Creon the king just gets worse and worse and worse throughout, and like I guess it's a prequel because you go back in time. So like by the end, they're like, oh, this is a terrible person. Like you can't listen to anything he says, and it's like, well, wait a minute. Like that's why we need principles. Like
Yeah.
if you operate on moral principles all the time, you would have to say that like his decree was immoral, it was wrong, and that you have the moral obligation not to follow that law. Like you have the moral obligation to do the right thing for your family. And like when it comes to like anarchism, I can even put something into that, like bodily autonomy. I own my body. So I have a say what happens to my body even after I'm dead. And if I say that I want to be buried in a certain way, it should be dependent on my family to fulfill my wishes, not the government to step in and say, no, you can't do that. And I could see how this could get weird. Like one of the circumstances that I brought in was California has recently passed a law, this was a while ago, where you can compost bodies and use the compost to grow food for people.
Mhm.
And you should absolutely have the right to say, I do not want that to happen to my body. And people, oh, that's crazy. That's stupid. You can't say something like that would never happen. And it's like, well, here's the article. So like
Yeah.
it can happen. So why don't we stick on principles instead of just listening to these elites who clearly have like do not have our best interests at heart, right?
No. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think in the idea in the discussion of principles, philosophy can talk about it all day. Love it. It comes down to the what is it? The fallacy of belief or the fallacy in inherent truth or inherent morality,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Is I mean, if you take the composting example, logically speaking, if you talk to a mathematician, they'll probably say, yeah, well, 2 + 2 still, or 1 + 1, you still got to somehow, um, you know, uh, you have to take this into consideration. You have to account for the one that was created, right? The energy that it took to create the body, to create the life, to raise the child, and then this deceased body. What do we do with that, right? You talk to a physicist, probably similar answer. You talk to, but then if you talk to, let's say, a priest, they're going more than likely you're going to have something else that is tied to the Bible, or if you're Muslim, tied to the Quran, and it's going to be built on like you said, a set of principles that may not be logical. Now, I'm not saying it's right or wrong or otherwise. I'm saying that both of those can't exist at the same time.
Sure.
Especially in, like, if we're talking about, like I said, the principles of a city, which we have this issue right now, are different than the principles of yourself or somebody out in, like, rural Kansas or something.
Mhm.
The principles that, or at least the the um the pressures that they're experiencing in the city are going to be a lot different. So it's like, how do they cater to, overpopulation, or like a housing crisis or a homeless issue in a large city? That solution is going to be a lot different than the solution for rural Kansas. And so if somebody, you could take it the opposite way. If somebody has the belief that, you know, sacrificial cannibalism in in grandma's death is like the preferred
Yeah,
method of composting or burial or whatever, right? Like we've had weird burial
yeah,
traditions throughout
sure.
human history, right? And so and we believed wholeheartedly in those traditions at the time. And come to find out later on, like, well, cannibalism can lead to
Sure.
this and this. I mean, there's issues there. And it's like, I don't know, maybe the idea that we should base these things on principle can lead us into murky waters, because we can then attach ourselves to these traditions that then prove to be outdated, prove to be wrong. I mean, look at the pot discussion, look
Mhm.
at, I mean, I would throw the US government into that discussion. Like we're so hell bent on preserving what this idea, whether it is present or not,
Mhm.
of the US. We're so hell bent on that. When you talk to a conservative, they're like, no, we got to uphold strong moral family
Constitution.
values, constitute. I mean, I'm constitution,
Yeah.
advocate at heart. Right. But it's like, there in the Constitution also there's no mention of like social media or the digital age or Moore's law or AI supremacy or any of the nuclear weapons, right? So these are conversations we've had since the signing of the Declaration of Independence.
Mhm.
So maybe we need a little update. Sure. Does that also mean that the principle of the Second Amendment for the reason of self-protection is not also part of that update? Absolutely not. That it means we still need to, again, we need to educate ourselves. We need to have the opinion on it. We need to discuss these opinions. I mean, that's the whole point of I don't know, community here.
Yeah.
And when we come, that's why I say the murky waters of principles. I think if we have only one person or one group of people describing or saying or deciding the principle for the country because they happen to own a majority stock in the country or happen to run the country or happen to be the president of the country, is that the principle that I want to live by? That self-autonomy thing?
Yeah.
Not necessarily. And even if I do agree, do I inherently think that my principle outweighs another's? That's another thing that, living overseas, that I saw a lot is I had to adhere to a lot of these other principles that I didn't agree with personally, but I'm a guest, over
Yeah.
here. So it's like you go into somebody else's house, you remove your shoes if that's the custom, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And these are small examples, but if a principle becomes, like a mandate or a policy or
Yeah.
the speed limit or whatever, then I start to get shaky. And again, Morpheus will point me out right
Yeah.
now,
Right.
right? He'll give away the sauce. It's telling
Sure.
me I'm a libertarian here, but I don't know. I again, I don't have the solution. I never
Yeah.
do. I always speak out of my ass.
So here's a great example where like things just get super murky and we'll get out of here on this. Like we just did an hour and I
Fuck
didn't
yeah, dude.
we didn't get to any of the stuff that I wanted to, but that's okay. Um
Sorry.
yeah, so like vaccines for children, right? So it's like we've got this
Right.
battery of vaccines that you take before you go to school. And we know these vaccines are safe, so like just take them and everything will be fine. So then you go, all right, like should you be forced to have a vaccine if you don't want it? Like if you own your own body, if like bodily autonomy is a true reality, then like you should have the option not to take those. But then you've got the argument on the other side going, well, wait a minute. If you don't take those, then you're going to be like put other people at risk. And then you go, well, wait a minute. Those other people are all vaccinated. So how am I going to put them at risk if they're already vaccinated? So, you just get into this
Mhm.
weird territory where it's like, all right, do we force them to take just these? Because for now it's just these. Like maybe it'll be COVID and RSV next year. And like,
Right.
I don't know how much you know about those things, but I wouldn't give those to my kids. And
No.
it's like, so do we say just these and hope that they're never going to add more and that one
Mhm.
of them that they add is not going to be bad for you? Or do we just say, hey, look, everybody has the opportunity to take these. If you take them, great. If you don't, you don't. And like, let's just let it flush out. There's no real like right or wrong answer to that. Like well, I guess that I believe that, people should have the choice, but like, it's a murky subject. Like,
Mm.
what do you really do about something like that?
Well, so I think there is a closer middle ground than a lot of people make it out to be. One is like hygiene, right? We all agree. I mean, there's a reason why when I do first aid, right? There's like a sequence of events, right? There's if the scene is safe, right, the area is safe, that's always step one, right? Like, don't injure yourself if you're trying to
Yeah.
take care of the injured, kind of a thing, right? Next step is like the ABCs, all right? Because what are they going to die from first? One is massive hemorrhage, all right? So if it's PMARCH, P is the acronym we use in trauma situation, right? The M in March is massive hemorrhage, because they will die in less than 2 minutes if you don't figure out, if they're hemorrhaging, how to stop it. All right. If you could take care of massive hemorrhage, I don't think anybody is going to argue that a tourniquet, because if you use a tourniquet incorrectly, can be harmful to somebody. I don't think anybody who has a tourniquet put on them to stop a massive hemorrhage is then going to argue, the efficacy, or maybe the how long it was on there, or who
Yeah.
transferred possession, or this, that, the other, right? Second one is airway, right? If you do a crike, I don't think somebody who's now alive is going to argue with your decision to keep them alive with a crike, if they now have a hole in their neck for the rest of their life. I think, like, you kind of weigh those odds, and I think hygiene is like a good example for the vaccine
Hmm.
conversation now, because we have been able to, through penicillin, for example, or a series of vaccines, just any shot, for example, right? A lot of people back in the day, and when I say back in the day, is, let's say, 1700,
Sure.
right? We're dying of a lot of quote unquote preventable things that we now have solutions for. And I think that's where a lot of this plays out. Is it good to be the guinea pig in the situation? No, it's not. And I myself really hated and have talked extensively about being the guinea pig with this whole COVID
Yeah.
vaccine. Um, but then you also have the other side of the coin, right? When we learn that washing your hands can help, or washing utensils before surgery
Hmm.
can help prevent sepsis and infection, that was something that more people, after it started to happen, just wholeheartedly accepted, because it was there. The data was there. It was clear. Proof is in the pudding, so to speak.
Hmm.
Where I think now that we're going down more of these rabbit holes with like vaccine efficacy, we're not quite seeing the proof in the pudding. Some people do, and some people can, and a lot of people take that for granted. And then you confuse what a lot of these companies are doing, intentionally, because these companies are intentionally trying to confuse you. They're saying that, one, this vaccine is a vaccine. Well, it's not. Like you said, if you're vaccinated against chickenpox, for example, it doesn't matter if your friend has chickenpox.
Yeah.
You're going to be fine because you're vaccinated for chickenpox. Pertussis, cough. If you're an infant and your sibling has a cough, it's not going to affect you because you've already been vaccinated. When your immune system was a weaker, the young and the old kind of immune
Yeah.
system issue, right? Those are already taken care of. But then you mix in gene therapy
Yeah.
into the conversation. Now people are associating gene therapy, or I mean, especially with CRISPR coming, more
Yeah.
and more out into the conversation, and being more and more feasible. And now that it's getting cheaper and cheaper to do, you're getting things like gene therapy mixed into the conversation of vaccination, and those are not the same thing. And but if you call them vaccine, you call them a vaccination, and then people see that, oh wow, you actually have a huge array of side effects, and you actually never tested, and you actually lied about testing, and then you're backed with huge financial incentives, people start to distrust you, and rightfully so. And if you're a company that that's partaking in it, whether this is Boeing, with their or any third party that's supplying Boeing with any of their parts, and you're doing these things, cutting corners here and there, don't be shocked when people fucking distrust you.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we don't have the education, we don't have the ability to not trust the expert. Like, you go to a doctor, you hope that they went to medical school. You hope that they know how to put a tourniquet on correctly, so that you're not harming somebody's limb rather than saving their life, kind of a thing, right?
Yeah.
But we don't have that right now. So that breakdown is, I think, where that vaccination conversation mostly ends. Is like,
Yeah.
if you go down that rabbit hole and you start educating yourself, like you said, you may end up in college and be in front of a professor who has never gone down that rabbit hole, has
Mhm.
never educated themselves, but is still there teaching med school students X, Y, and Z about whatever it is that they're trusting their experts to tell them, or to pass on, rather. And that's, I think, the confusion with it. So yes, it's a murky water, but at the same time, it's also like, should you have body autonomy? Absolutely. And if that goes down to, you don't want to take a vaccine, even if it is a vaccine, even if you don't want to vaccinate your kid, then at the same time, if your kid dies, then or
Yeah,
you
it's on
die, or
you.
whatever, if
Yeah.
you don't wash your hands and you eat shit, you
Yeah.
eat your food out of piles of shit, that's on you if you get sick, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
I inherently believe.
Which is why I think like private property would solve a lot of this. So like if you had a private school instead of a government school, where a government school is just going to have all these mandates, one size fits all for everything, where a private school can say, hey, look, you don't have to take these things. If you don't have to take anything to come here. And if that private school gets massive outbreaks of disease and like scurvy because people aren't washing their hands and they're doing dirty things, then you're not going to send your kids there. You'll send your kids to this other school that has has a history of being clean. They say, hey, look, we think that these vaccines are safe, so we're going to require that you have theirs. And the market should flesh that out. Like at a certain point, like you should say, all right, like we have enough data on these vaccines. I believe that they're safe. I have no problem sending my kid to this school that is going to be much cleaner, right? So that's kind of the way
Logical, right?
I look at it.
That's
right?
and again, that's the mental ability and fortitude that I think those that have it take for granted that everybody has it,
Right. Well, I think that's a great way to get out of here. Hermes, it was a pleasure having you on, man. What's the name of your podcast again?
First of all, thanks, man. Thanks for having me on. It has been a blast. Like you said, it shot by that hour. Absolute blast. It's the Scuttlebutt Podcast. There's a lot of Scuttlebutt podcasts out there, but we are the Scuttlebutt Podcast, the one and only. You find a barrel with some headphones on it, you're probably in the right place. We're on all the Spotify and Apple Music and all that good stuff. It's not too hard to find me. Look for a barrel and a mic and some headphones. You'll find me.
Sounds good, man. You got it. You got yourself a new listener today. That's for sure. Take it easy, everybody. Have a good night.